October 25th, 1944, just before 7 in the morning. The Philippine Sea is quiet, almost peaceful. The water is flat and gray. The sun is climbing over the horizon, turning the clouds pink and orange. Sailors on the small American ships are starting their day. Some are eating breakfast. Some are writing letters to wives and girlfriends back home. Some are playing cards below deck, killing time like soldiers have done for thousands of years. Nobody is worried. Nobody is scared. This is supposed to be a quiet morning, a safe morning. The big Japanese fleet is far away, being hunted by American battleships somewhere to the north. At least that's what everyone believes. Then a lookout on one of the escort carriers sees something. Dark shapes on the horizon. He raises his binoculars and looks closer. His hands start shaking. He opens his mouth to speak, but at first, nothing comes out. His throat is dry. His heart is pounding so hard he can feel it in his ears. Finally, he finds his voice. "Ships," he says, "Japanese ships." And then, quieter, almost to himself. "Oh God, there's so many of them." The radio explodes with chatter. Every ship in the American formation is seeing the same thing now. Japanese warships, coming out of the morning mist like a nightmare coming to life. Sailors scramble to battle stations. Alarms ring. Men run through narrow corridors, bumping into each other, shouting questions nobody can answer. How did this happen? Where did they come from? Where are our battleships? On the bridges of the American ships, officers grab binoculars and start counting the enemy. 1 battleship, 2 battleships, 3, 4 cruisers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 destroyers. They stop counting at 11, 23 Japanese warships in total, and leading them all is a monster, the Yamato. The largest battleship ever built by human hands, 70,000 tons of steel and fury. Her guns are 18 inches wide. They can fire shells that weigh as much as a small car. Those shells can travel 25 miles. One hit from those guns can sink almost anything that floats. She's coming straight at them. The American commander is a man named Clifton Sprague. He's in charge of a group called Taffy 3, 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts. Sprague looks at the Japanese fleet through his binoculars. He looks at his own ships, and he feels something cold settle in his stomach. His escort carriers weren't built for battle. They're slow. 18 knots maximum. The Japanese cruisers can do 35. His carriers can't run. His carriers are also thin-skinned. Their armor is almost nothing. A shell from a destroyer could punch right through them. A shell from a battleship wouldn't even slow down. And his guns? His biggest guns are 5 inches. The Yamato's guns are 18 inches. It's like throwing rocks at a tank. Sprague does the math. He runs the numbers every way he can think of. Every calculation ends the same way. They're all going to die. He grabs his radio. His voice is steady, but the words are desperate. "This is Taffy 3. We are under attack by enemy surface force. Request immediate assistance. Any assistance. We need help now." The radio crackles. No response. Sprague tries again. Still nothing. Halsey's fleet, the big American battleships that were supposed to protect them, is 200 miles away, chasing a decoy. They fell for a Japanese trick. No help is coming. Sprague gives the only orders he can. Run, make smoke, get the planes in the air, and pray. On the bridge of the USS Johnston, Commander Ernest Evans is watching the same nightmare unfold. The Johnston is a Fletcher-class destroyer, a small ship. Fast and nimble, yes. Armed with guns and torpedoes, yes. but small. A destroyer is not supposed to fight battleships. That's not what destroyers do. That's not what they're built for. Evans knows this. He knows it better than anyone. He knows exactly what will happen if his little ship goes up against those monsters on the horizon. But Evans is not thinking about survival right now. He's thinking about the escort carriers behind him. 6 ships, thousands of men. Men who will die if somebody doesn't do something. He's thinking about the invasion fleet beyond them. Transports full of soldiers, supply ships full of ammunition, hospital ships full of wounded men, all of them defenseless, all of them depending on Taffy 3 to protect them. If the Japanese get through, they will slaughter everyone. Evans makes his decision. He doesn't ask permission. He doesn't wait for orders. He doesn't call a meeting or consult with anyone. He simply turns his ship around, and he attacks. The men on the Johnston feel the ship surge forward. The engines roar. The deck vibrates under their feet. They're accelerating to full speed. 35 knots, as fast as the ship can go. Some sailors don't understand what's happening at first. They're confused. Why are they speeding up? Shouldn't they be running away? Then they look over the bow. They see where they're heading. Toward the Japanese, toward the battleships, toward the cruisers, toward the destroyers, toward certain death. One sailor later said his first thought was that the captain had lost his mind. This was suicide. This was insane. No destroyer attacks a fleet of battleships. It doesn't happen. It can't happen. Then he looked at Commander Evans. Evans was standing on the bridge, calm as a man waiting for a bus. No fear in his eyes, no hesitation, just cold, hard determination. And the sailor understood. They weren't trying to win. They weren't trying to survive. They were trying to buy time. Every second the Japanese spent dealing with the Johnston was a second the carriers could use to escape. Every shell the Japanese fired at them was a shell that wasn't hitting the defenseless escort carriers. They were going to die so that others could live. Evans picked up the microphone and spoke to his crew. His voice was quiet, steady, almost gentle. A lot of good men are going to die today if somebody doesn't slow those ships down. We're going to be that somebody. I'm taking us in. He paused. I want every man to do his duty. Load the guns, ready the torpedoes, and whatever happens, keep fighting. Keep fighting until you can't fight anymore. Nobody said a word. They just went to their stations. The Johnston raced toward the enemy fleet, alone. One small ship against 23. Smoke poured from her funnels, spreading across the water behind her, creating a screen for the carriers to hide behind. But the Johnston herself was out in the open, visible, exposed. The Japanese spotted her immediately. On the bridges of the Japanese cruisers, officers stared in disbelief. What was this American ship doing? Why was it attacking? Didn't they understand what was about to happen to them? But confusion quickly turned to action. Orders were shouted, gun crews scrambled to their positions, massive turrets swung toward the tiny American destroyer, and then the Japanese opened fire. The first salvo missed. Giant columns of water exploded around the Johnston. Each column was taller than the ship itself. The sound was deafening, like thunder, but sharper, angrier. The Japanese used different colored dyes in their shells so they could track their shots. Red dye, blue dye, green dye, yellow dye, purple dye. The water around the Johnston erupted in a rainbow of death, colored geysers shooting up on every side. some so close that the spray washed over the deck. Evans threw the wheel hard left. The Johnston heeled over, turning sharply. A shell passed through the space where she had been a second before. Hard right. Another shell missed. Left again. Right again. Zigzagging. Weaving. Dancing between the splashes. Evans was playing the most dangerous game in the world. Dodging bullets he couldn't see until they hit the water. Guessing where the next salvo would land. One wrong guess and they were dead. But he was good at this, really good. Shell after shell missed. The Johnston kept coming. The range closed with terrible speed. 10,000 yards, 8,000 yards, 6,000 yards. At this distance, the crew could see individual features on the Japanese ships, the pagoda masts, the massive gun turrets, the tiny figures of enemy sailors running across the decks. Evans was heading straight for the heavy cruiser Kumano. She was the lead ship of the Japanese cruiser column, a monster. Over 15,000 tons, 8-inch guns, thick armor, a ship designed to destroy things exactly like the Johnston. 5,000 yards. Evans gave the order. Fire torpedoes. The torpedo officer pressed the firing switch. 10 torpedoes dropped into the water with 10 loud splashes. They hit the surface, their motors kicked in, and they raced away from the Johnston in a fan-shaped spread. Torpedoes are strange weapons. Once you fire them, they're out of your hands. You can't steer them. You can't call them back. You just watch them go and hope. The crew of the Johnston watched their torpedoes run. White wakes in the gray water, 10 lines of bubbles heading toward the enemy. The Kumano saw them coming. Her captain ordered evasive action. The big cruiser started to turn, but she was too slow. One torpedo hit. The explosion was massive. A pillar of fire and water shot up from the Kumano's bow. The sound reached the Johnston a moment later, a deep, heavy boom that the sailors felt in their chests. When the spray cleared, the Kumano was slowing down. Her bow was gone, just gone, ripped off by the torpedo. Water was pouring into her forward compartments. She was out of the fight. The crew of the Johnston erupted in cheers. Their tiny ship had just crippled a heavy cruiser. David had just bloodied Goliath, but Goliath had friends. The battleship Congo found her range. She was an older battleship, but her guns were still massive, 14 inches. Each shell weighed over 1,000 pounds. The first shell hit the Johnston's engine room. The explosion was catastrophic. Metal tore, steam pipes burst. Men who had been working at their stations one second were dead the next. The engine room became a hellscape of fire and scalding steam. The Johnston shuddered like a wounded animal. Her speed dropped instantly. She had been making 35 knots. Now she was making barely 17. Before the crew could even process what had happened, the second shell hit. This one struck near the bridge. Shrapnel flew in every direction, hot metal fragments, each one deadly, slicing through the air. Commander Evans was standing at his station. The shrapnel hit him. Fragments tore into his face, his chest, his hands. 2 of his fingers were ripped off, just gone. His shirt was shredded and soaked with blood. Wounds covered his face. The men near him saw him stagger. They thought he was going down. He didn't go down. He steadied himself. He looked at his mangled hand. Blood was pouring from where his fingers used to be. He wrapped a rag around the wound. Tight. He wiped blood from his eyes with his remaining fingers. And he kept giving orders. The third shell hit the stern. It knocked out the rear gun turrets. More men died. The The ship shook so hard that sailors were thrown off their feet. In less than a minute, the Johnston went from a fighting ship to a wreck. Half her engine power was gone. Several guns were destroyed. Fires were burning in multiple compartments. Dozens of men were dead or dying. Any other ship would have retreated. Any other captain would have pulled back, hidden in the smoke, tried to save what was left of his crew. Not Evans, not the Johnston. A rain squall appeared ahead, a patch of dark clouds dropping heavy rain on the ocean. A hiding place. Evans steered the Johnston into it. Inside the squall, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The Japanese couldn't see them. For a few precious minutes, the Johnston was invisible. The crew worked like men possessed. Damage control teams fought fires. Engineers crawled through wreckage trying to restore power. Medical teams dragged wounded men to safety and did what they could for injuries that no one should survive. The ship was a nightmare. Twisted metal, blood on the decks, bodies of friends lying where they fell, but she was still floating, still alive. The engineers performed a miracle. They got one of the damaged boilers working again. Speed crept back up. Not full speed, but something. Enough to move, enough to fight. Gun crews checked their weapons. The forward turrets still worked. Not all of them, but enough. The Johnston had taken a beating that should have destroyed her, and she was getting back up. 10 minutes passed. The rain started to thin. Evans knew they couldn't hide forever. The Japanese were still out there. The carriers were still in danger. He had a choice to make. He could try to slip away in the smoke. His ship was badly damaged. His crew was decimated. Nobody would blame him for retreating. He had already done more than anyone could have asked. Or he could go back out there, back into the guns, back into certain death. For Ernest Evans, it wasn't really a choice at all. The Johnston emerged from the rain squall, and she attacked again. The Japanese couldn't believe what they were seeing. That American destroyer, the one they had hit multiple times, the one that was on fire, the one that should be sinking. She was coming back. She was attacking again. What kind of madmen were on that ship? Evans had spotted something while they were in the squall, a group of Japanese destroyers forming up for a torpedo attack. They were getting into position to launch torpedoes at the escort carriers. Those carriers had no defense against torpedoes. If those Japanese destroyers completed their attack, American ships would die. Hundreds of men would die. Evans pointed the Johnston at the Japanese destroyers. All ahead, full, open fire. The Johnston's forward guns barked to life. Shell after shell flew at the enemy destroyers. The Japanese destroyer captains were caught off guard. They had been focused on the carriers. They hadn't expected anyone to attack them. Shells from the Johnston started hitting their lead ship. Explosions, fires, chaos. The Japanese formation fell apart. They abandoned their torpedo run. They scattered, trying to deal with this insane American ship that wouldn't stop fighting. The carriers were safe, for now. A half-dead destroyer had just broken up an entire Japanese destroyer attack. But the Johnston had made herself a target again. The Japanese cruisers found her. Their 8-inch guns opened up. Shells rained down on the Johnston. More hits, more explosions, more men dying at their stations. A shell hit the forward gun turret. The men inside were killed instantly. Another shell hit amidships. More fires, more flooding. The Johnston was coming apart. Piece by piece, she was being dismantled by enemy fire. But her remaining guns kept firing. The gun crews were incredible. They knew they were going to die. They knew the ship was finished, but they kept loading and shooting. Over and over, as fast as they could, they fired over 500 shells that morning. 500 shells from a ship that was disintegrating around them. The steering failed. The Johnston couldn't control her direction anymore. She started circling helplessly, her rudder jammed. She was still shooting. Her guns were still barking defiance at the enemy. But she couldn't maneuver. She couldn't dodge. She was a sitting duck. The Japanese moved in for the kill. A heavy cruiser approached the Johnston from close range, so close that the crews could see each other's faces. Japanese sailors lined the rails of the cruiser, looking down at the dying American destroyer. They watched her burn. They watched her list. They watched her guns still firing, even as the ship fell apart. What happened next has been debated for 80 years. Some survivors swear they saw a Japanese officer standing on the deck of that cruiser. They say he looked at the Johnston, at this tiny, broken ship that had fought so hard, that had charged their entire fleet, that had taken everything they could throw at her and refused to stop fighting. And they say he saluted, a Japanese officer saluting an enemy ship. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. In the chaos of battle, memories play tricks. But the survivors believed it. They believed that even the enemy was in awe of what the Johnston had done. Then the cruiser opened fire at point-blank range. At 9:45 in the morning, Commander Ernest Evans gave his last order. Abandon ship. The Johnston was finished. She was flooding fast. She was on fire in a dozen places. She was going down. The men who could still move helped the wounded. They threw life rafts over the side. They jumped into the water, into the oil and debris and bodies of their friends. Evans was last seen on the fantail of the ship, the rear deck. He was organizing the evacuation, helping wounded men get to the rails, doing his job until the very last second. A survivor remembered seeing him standing there, covered in blood, missing fingers, wounded in a dozen places. He should have been dead hours ago. He was still fighting, still leading. The ship rolled, and Ernest Evans was gone. At 10:10 in the morning, the USS Johnston slipped beneath the waves. She went down bow first. Her stern rose out of the water, hung there for a moment, and then slid under. And then she was gone. She took 186 of her crew with her. Only 141 men survived. They floated in the water for 2 days. Sharks circled. The sun beat down. Men died from their wounds, from exhaustion, from thirst. When rescue finally came, the survivors were barely alive. But they were alive because their captain had bought them time, because their ship had done the impossible. But here's the part of the story that really matters. While the Johnston was fighting and dying, everything was chaos. The other destroyers had followed Evans's lead. The whole charged the Japanese fleet and was blown apart. The destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, a ship even smaller than the Johnston, attacked ships 20 times her size until she was destroyed. The Heermann made torpedo runs against battleships. The planes from the escort carriers attacked with everything they had. Some of them ran out of bombs and made dry runs, diving at the Japanese ships with empty weapons just to distract them. Some pilots strafed battleships with machine guns, knowing their bullets couldn't do any real damage, but hoping to draw attention away from the ships. It was insanity. Glorious, magnificent insanity. And it worked. Admiral Kurita, the Japanese commander, was completely overwhelmed. His fleet was being attacked from every direction. Ships were exploding. Torpedoes were running everywhere. Planes were diving at him constantly. He had no idea how weak the American force really was. He thought he must be facing a major fleet, powerful carriers, cruisers, maybe even battleships. Why else would they be attacking so aggressively? Why else would these tiny ships be charging at his battleships? It didn't make sense unless there was a much larger force waiting somewhere. There wasn't. There was nothing but a few destroyers and some escort carriers. But Kurita didn't know that. And in his moment of confusion, he made an unbelievable decision. He turned around. At the moment of his greatest triumph, with the American escort carriers almost in his grasp, with victory right in front of him, Kurita ordered his fleet to withdraw. He broke off the attack. He retreated. The Japanese had won the battle. They had sunk ships. They had inflicted terrible losses, but they didn't achieve their mission. They didn't destroy the American invasion fleet. They didn't stop the liberation of the Philippines. Because a handful of tiny ships had made them hesitate, had made them doubt, had scared them into thinking there was something bigger waiting behind the smoke. There wasn't anything bigger, just some very brave men on some very small ships who decided that today was not the day to run away. Commander Ernest Evans was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military honor in the United States. The citation reads like something from a legend. It talks about how he led his ship against overwhelming odds, how he fought until his ship was shot out from under him, how his courage inspired everyone around him. But words on a piece of paper can't capture what really happened that morning. A man looked at certain death and said, "No, not today." In 2021, an exploration team found the wreck of the USS Johnston. She was lying on the bottom of the Philippine Sea, 20,000 feet down, deeper than any shipwreck ever found before. So deep that sunlight never reaches her, so deep that the pressure would crush a human being instantly. The team sent down cameras. What they found brought tears to the eyes of everyone watching. The hull number was still visible. 557. The Johnston, still at her post, still in the dark, still guarding the ocean where she made her last stand. The battle off Samar is studied in naval academies around the world. They study it because it shouldn't have worked. The math doesn't add up. A handful of destroyers and escort carriers should not have been able to turn back a fleet of battleships and cruisers. But they did. And the reason they did is simple. Courage, not the absence of fear. Every man on those ships was terrified. They knew they were going to die. They knew the odds were impossible, but they fought anyway. One destroyer charged 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. She fired over 500 shells. She launched 10 torpedoes. She crippled a heavy cruiser. She helped turn back an entire enemy fleet. And she did it with a crew of 327 men, led by a captain who refused to give up. The USS Johnston, the tiny ship that attacked a fleet, the destroyer that saved an army. Remember her name. Remember the men who sailed on her. Remember what they did and why they did it. Because stories like this don't come along very often. And when they do, they deserve to be told.